Hey everyone. So we're constantly hearing that two things are connected, right? But is that really enough? Today, we are going to pull back the curtain and look at the hidden mechanics of cause and effect, the secret architecture that explains not just if things are related, but how and when they actually matter.
I mean, let's be real. A simple headline that just says X is linked to Y doesn't really tell you the full story. It just leaves you hanging, wondering, okay, but how? And under what conditions does this even happen? That's the mystery we are solving today.
So here's the game plan. First, we'll see why just finding a simple link is only the beginning. Then we'll dive into the how with a concept called mediation. And then the when with moderation. And finally, we're going to put it all together to see why telling this deeper story is so incredibly important.
Every great investigation starts with a basic question. Is there a link here? But as we're about to find out, finding that connection is really just the first step on a way more interesting journey.
You know, the author of our source material, Andrew Hayes, he tells this great story about one of his first research papers. He found that students who had a better attitude about college tended to sit closer to the front of the classroom. He was super excited, but the paper got rejected. And the reason why is so important. He could only guess why that link existed, and he had no idea what its boundary conditions were. You know, the situations where the effect might be stronger or weaker or maybe just disappear altogether.
And that rejection, it leads us straight into our first big idea. If you really want to understand a relationship between two things, you have to figure out the mechanism. You've got to answer the how question.
And this is exactly what mediation analysis is for. It's all about finding that process, that mechanism that connects a cause, let's call it X, to an outcome, Y. Just think of it like the pipeline or the conduit that the effect flows through. We're not just looking at the start and the finish. We're trying to find the story in between.
A really great way to visualize this is like a line of dominoes. The first domino, X, doesn't actually hit the last one, Y, directly. Nope. Instead, X tips over a meteor domino, our mediator M, and it's that mediator M that then goes on to tip over the final outcome, Y. It's a chain reaction. Let's make this super real with an example. A study looked at entrepreneurs and found that economic stress doesn't just directly make them want to quit their business. It's not that simple. Instead, the stress, that's X, leads to feelings of depression. That's our mediator, M. And it's those feelings of depression that ultimately make them want to leave their venture. That's why. See? That's the how.
And this right here leads to a really critical, kind of myth-busting point. The old way of doing things said you had to find a direct link between X and Y before you could even go looking for a mediator. But the modern view shows us that's just not true. That indirect domino effect can be happening and be really important, even if there's no detectable direct connection. And that was a total game changer for researchers.
Okay, so we've answered how, but that's only half the story, isn't it? The other huge question is all about context. We need to figure out the answer to when.
And this is where moderation comes into play. Instead of explaining the pathway, moderation helps us identify the conditions that actually change the strength of that pathway. It tells us when an effect is strong, when it's weak, or maybe when it's not even there at all.
The perfect analogy for this is a dimmer switch. Imagine the relationship between X and Y is a light bulb. Well, a moderator is the switch. It can turn the brightness way up or turn it way down. It could even change the color of the light completely. It basically controls the strength and the nature of the effect.
Check out this fascinating example. A study tested how framing a drought, saying it was caused by climate change versus just natural cycles, affected public support for aid. But the brilliant follow-up question was this: does that message land the same way for everyone?
And the answer was a huge no. The effect of the message totally depended on what a person already believed. For people with low skepticism, the climate change message made them less willing to withhold aid. But, and get this, for the high skeptics, the exact same message made them more willing to withhold aid. The effect didn't just get weaker or stronger, it completely flipped on its head. That is a perfect example of moderation.
So we have the how for mediation and the when for moderation. So what happens when we put them together? Well, that's when we get the most complete, the most powerful story of all.
This powerful combination is called a conditional process. And the core idea is actually pretty simple. The mechanism, our domino effect, doesn't always work the same way. The how is contingent on the when.
Let's just break down the logic here. First, we identify a mechanism, right? Our classic X to M to Y pathway. But then, and this is the magic part, we test if that entire pathway is conditional on some context. We ask, is there a moderator acting like a dimmer switch on one of those arrows, making the whole indirect effect stronger or weaker depending on the situation?
For instance, think about a study on team dynamics. The how was that dysfunctional behavior creates a negative tone, and that hurts the team's performance. But here's the when. This whole negative chain reaction was way stronger in teams that were also really expressive with negative nonverbal cues. The mechanism itself depended on the team's culture. So I know we've covered some pretty complex ideas, but why go to all this trouble? Why does digging this deep actually matter in the real world?
Well, it's because modern science demands more than just simple answers. The most important questions being asked today have moved into this realm of process, mechanism, and conditional features. We need to know not just if something works, but how it works, why it works, and for whom it works. Ultimately, what this all comes down to is the difference between a shallow headline and a deep understanding. It's the journey from seeing a simple link to getting the full story. X affects Y through this process, but only under these specific conditions. It's definitely more complex, but it's also a much more truthful model of how the world actually works.
And that leaves us with a final challenge. The next time you hear the two things are connected, I want you to ask those deeper questions. What's the hidden how? And what's the crucial when? Because finding those answers is how you uncover the real story. Thanks for joining our explanation.